From the University of Alaska Anchorage, this is Seawolf Voices, a podcast about the pathways to and from education. I'm your host, Matt Jardin. Mana, in Tagalog, the national language of the Philippines, translates to inheritance. It is also the title of an exhibit on display in the Anchorage Museum from October 2023, in time for Filipino American History Month, until January 2024. The exhibit serves as a collection of portraits and stories of Filipino immigrant elders from communities across Alaska. In this episode, journalism and public communications alumni Shayne Nuesca, Mana co-founder, and Pearl-Grace Pantaleone, Mana co-writer, talk about the origins of the project, the benefits of talking to strangers, and the importance of archiving our histories. Hey guys, thanks for coming on the podcast. Good to see you again.
Yeah,
good to see you.
Thanks for having us. Glad to be here.
So first off, can you just briefly introduce yourselves?
So I'm Shayne Nuesca. I'm a journalist based here in Anchorage, Alaska. Currently now work with the 907 Initiative starting in October, and I was previously at KTOO before that. What do I do with Mana? I think I'm in charge of the content most times. Started it with Tasha and Joshua Brandstetter, and I've been keeping tabs on the museum and making sure that our stories get told how we want them to be told.
I'm Pearl-Grace Pantaleone. I am an alumni here at UAA, Journalism Public Communications. I consider myself a storyteller. My day job, I am the Senior Communication Strategist at HDR, which is a transportation company. So I've been in the architectural, engineering, and construction industry for about a decade, doing marketing, communications, community involvement. And then I recently joined Mana, working with the content team and just helping out with communications now. Just anywhere they need help, I'm there.
Awesome. So, let's just start off with that. What is the Mana Project?
So Mana started, I would say a little over a year ago. It was sort of a culmination of the work that Tasha and I started at KTOO before I moved over to a different organization. We started laying some groundwork to get some more Filipino American voices on the air at KTOO. And we brought Tasha on board, and she's really been the one who's done the most legwork for that project. She has a separate exhibit going on down in Juneau. Basically, that first project was to get more Filipino voices on the Juneau airwaves. And then sometime in early October last year, Tasha, Josh, and I were like, wouldn't it be cool if we just got all of the Filipino media makers in Alaska to do something for Filipino American History Month? And we were a little late on it last year, and so all of our work has sort of been at the end of last year and the beginning of this year. Josh has some connections at the museum, and so we leveraged those, and we convinced them to do a pop-up from October of this year, and it'll be up through January.
So, Pearl-Grace, how did you come to be involved with the content team?
Yeah, so I think that, Alaska is a small town, or small, it's just a very small community. And I remember a couple months ago seeing on Instagram Mana and everything, and I was like, oh my gosh, I need to follow this because, we're Filipino, we just share and all that stuff. So I've been following it. And then I saw they were doing community submissions, and I was like, I need to do this for my Lola, my grandma. And it has just been like an incredibly beautiful journey, learning more about my family. And then so I submitted, and I actually work with Joshua's wife at HDR. And I met him at a picnic for the company. And we started talking about Mana, and then he asked me to kind of join because of my journalism background. And then I kind of just like jumped in head first, and then whatever they need me to do, I'm saying yes, of course, absolutely, because I really get behind the message and everything, and it just really means a lot. And being part of the content team and just like learning about all these other Filipinos in Alaska has been such an amazing experience. I've sat down and listened to the audio to transcribe it, and I'm just in tears. It is so moving, and I'm just very grateful to be part of the team.
this is the part where I also mentioned I'm on the content team also. And like you, like I'm listening to these interviews and I'm laughing and I'm crying. I'm like, oh, they remind me of my parents.
And all of their stories are so varied and different. I think, there's like a general trajectory of how people have gotten to Alaska, but I think the stories of their lives before that, I think was what hits me the most. It's like you have, the people who came here through like their academic background, or you have other folks who came here because they were laborers and they really just wanted to put in the work to make sure that their families were all good here and all good back home. And it's something that resonates, I think. It's like a common thread within our community, no matter how you got here.
How did you get involved?
How did you get involved, Matt?
Josh Ramsetter. He and I do a lot of filmmaking projects, like not together specifically, but we're part of like the filmmaking community.
Yeah.
And he just reached out to me one day and said, "Hey, you want to be part of Mana? Shayne knows you too." It was like you and I work together here in this very office.
Yeah.
So I just jumped at the chance to join because I've always been wanting to rediscover my Filipino roots for sure. So that's how I got involved. Pearl-Grace, can you tell us a little bit about your Lola and why was it important to you to also submit her story and honor her in this way?
Yeah, absolutely. My grandma has, been through a lot, like all other people and grandparents and stuff like that. But my family on my mom's side is very large. I have 14 cousins. All of them almost live here. I think there's just a few stragglers that left Alaska. But she's the reason why we're here. My sister and I were first generation born in America. And my grandma just worked really hard to make sure that we all have a better life. My sister was the first in the family on my mom's side to go to college, to graduate, to go to grad school and all that stuff. And my grandma is just like so amazing, and we just rally around her. Every time we have parties, she's like the center of everything. And I just wanted to honor her because she does so much for the family, and just wanted to say thank you. And when I did tell her about this, she was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm going to be in the museum." And she was actually trying to book a flight to the Philippines while this exhibit is going on because she was embarrassed, but we convinced her to stay. Yeah. And she's really looking forward to it.
So in addition to all the interview subjects and the community submissions, the Mana team collaborated with Filipino communities basically across Alaska. So what was it like working with so many Filipino communities to tell this large-scale story about our history?
Just from observing, every community is so different. I think we have all those common threads that tie us together as Filipinos in Alaska, but the stories of Filipinos in Juneau is different from the stories of Filipinos in Kodiak and Anchorage. Juneau has probably one of the oldest, if not the oldest, communities of Filipinos, starting with the Filipino and Tlingit families. Anchorage, you have the folks who came here through academia and through, their nursing background. It's just the varied stories and learning about where they come from, just the regional differences in general, not just the regional differences in Alaska, but like the regional differences from Philippines and them bringing that over to Alaska. I think that's shown through in all of the different stories we've gotten. And I wanted to touch on, Pearl-Grace, she submitted her story about her grandmother. So many of our stories are about women. And I think that speaks a lot to how the matriarch in Filipino culture is such the centerpiece of the entire family and sort of like the pillar of every family. And so we get to showcase that. And no matter what region they're from, I think that shines through the most, is that the Lola or the Tita who brought us over here is really the rock of every story.
That's funny that you mentioned that because on my family, like I said, my grandma had a lot of children. She had 7, and 6 of them were, female. And then the only son she had passed away with the flu. But with all my cousins, there are 3 boys.
Yeah.
Did any challenges come up when trying to tell the stories of some of these elders?
For me, because we were listening back to the interviews and we weren't really we weren't there with all of them. Josh and Tasha had collected them all. I think with that added sort of nuance and that challenge was making sure that their words came through and what they wanted to express came through. And when we're doing all these different rounds of edits, especially with a museum, like we want to make sure that we don't change anything in the way that they had expressed certain parts of their life. We're sensitive to how they identify themselves. We had this conversation too, just passively in text. It's like, do we say Filipino or Filipino when we talk about, our Lolas and our Titas? It's like, well, what do they call themselves? And so sticking true to what and how our elders express themselves and how they identify themselves, I think has been top of mind for me this whole time.
Yeah, and to kind of echo that, right? A good storyteller is also a good listener. And so for me, since I wasn't a part of those interviews, right? So I'm listening to the audio, I'm reading some of the labels that need to be edited. It's all about their words and what they're saying. And some of the challenges that I've seen is that a lot of the Filipinos in Alaska that we've talked to, they don't understand why we're doing this. Like, why does my story even matter?
Yep.
Right? And so they don't see the impact that they've done and how their lives have taken shape that are amazing. And so it's really cool to talk with them. And, we'll have maybe some people will have a list of questions to ask, but when you're actually in the interview, you just go with the flow and you see where it takes you. And it's just so cool for their stories to actually come out and hear some of their personalities just come alive during those. And that's the challenge that I've seen is they're like, why are you doing this? Like when I was interviewing my Lola, she was like, I don't know. I just came to America because I thought it would be better. But I'm like, why? It's that why. So,
yeah. I think we also made a point to find people or to talk with people who would normally not be part of the mainstream conversation, right? And so folks who spent their early years working in the cannery, folks who aren't necessarily the ones front and center when we go or when somebody comes to the Filipino community and wants to learn more. It's always maybe 2 or 3 of the same people. So we wanted to make sure that we were reaching out to folks who normally wouldn't have an opportunity to talk about their experiences.
For people who can't come to the exhibit, can you preview any entries that have stood out to you at all?
Well, I think this might resonate with folks in Anchorage, whether or not they had the opportunity to be in her classroom, but Aurora Hovland, or Senora Hovland, if some folks may know her from Hantry Middle School, she was part of sort of the beginnings of the Filipino community of Anchorage, Alaska, Inc., as we know it today. I learned so much about her. She has lived, I feel like, 20 different lives in her 90 plus years on this earth. But she stands out as a character, not just within our community, but worldwide. I've learned so much about her, and really, I think her story kind of speaks to just how different your life becomes when you move to a different country. So she started out in the Philippines and then worked her way through academia, and that brought her to different research opportunities around the world, and from Italy and Spain, and then coming to Alaska, where her life totally changed and she became an educator. So I think she has some of the cooler stories.
Did any stand out for you, Pearl-Grace?
Yeah, absolutely.
Other than your Lola, right?
Of course, absolutely. It was Tasha's Lola.
Oh, yeah.
What's her name? Feli?
Feli, yes.
Okay, so I listened to her audio first, maybe just just listening to it, and then I listened to it a second time to kind of translate it or transcribe it, and I could tell it was hard for Tasha to kind of pull information out of her Lola, and it was a little hard for her to understand her too. I think she had her mom there to kind of help translate some things and try to pull things out, and you can just tell that Feli just wasn't into it. She was like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll tell you here and there, jumping around her life and stuff like that. And then there's just this one part where she just started humming. She just talked about when she was younger and she would go to these parties and she would sing and all that stuff. And she first started talking about all these men that were her suitors. And so she was talking about like having this box of like all these old boyfriends too. And I'm thinking like, I don't know if she's actually talking about these guys that she's in love with, but she is talking through her heart. And then when they would ask her questions about her life, she would kind of forget. And until the end, when they were kind of concluding the interview, everybody was talking, and then she started humming. And then that is when she started coming alive. And that's when I like broke down, because her love for music. And that was her past love that she like missed in the Philippines.
Trying to remember where I was. I need a second. Moving to the show. When they're petitioned. Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you. Okay, how did they? Oh, they were actually not ready already to come.
Yeah,
Because
then
it's been a
Uncle
long
Henry
time.
was in his 20s probably, right? Because Dad was 20,
Yeah.
so he was, Uncle Henry's like what, 25, 26? Messed up. Messed up. I wanted to ask us.
You know, you don't have to say a lot of words, but her voice said everything.
I really need to listen to the rest of the
Oh gosh.
Bring
that, tissues.
Yeah, that interview was especially hard for Tasha, but I think that was like one of the only ones I cried after, because the song that she sings at the end is about, like roughly translated, is missing. It's about missing a memory that you can't really remember, and I was just like, oh my gosh, like that's probably how she felt that entire interview. You know, she couldn't really express what she wanted to express, but she knew that she missed her life before coming to Alaska.
Can you sing a little bit of it?
Kapag ikaw ang umibig at saka masawi, di mo ba daramdamin ito tulad ng pagdaramdam ko sa'yo, kung to ay sadyang tunay na mangyari sa buhay ko, ay baka naisin ko pang maglaho sa mundo.
He still sing. He can still sing.
Oh, that I'm not a good. My voice is not good anymore.
Not all.
It was beautiful.
Thank you.
See? Even Josh says.
That's crazy that it translates to that, because that's what I felt.
Yeah.
Wow.
Did you guys listen to the Camilla Cook interview?
No, tell us.
Tell us
That's
about that.
one of the ones that I transcribed. And first of all, she is a baller.
100%. I
Yeah.
could tell by her photos.
Yeah, you know, smokes her cigarettes backwards. You know, it's like my lungs are fine. Yeah, but you know, her story really demonstrates the importance of this project, in that she is largely estranged from her family and doesn't have a lot of archival photos or documents. So, you know, there's not a lot to show at the museum. And I think, was it Josh who had the idea of just, you know, showing
blank
a blank
canvas.
canvas?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that'll be really interesting to see how that comes together at the actual exhibit. Based on her audio alone, like she's got a wonderful story. I can't wait to see how that's shown at the
That's
museum.
amazing.
How has your time in the JPC program helped you to, you know, set up or produce the Midnight Project?
Definitely the storytelling aspect of it. And also, one of the professors I had at JPC always told us to not be afraid to talk to strangers, or actually, no, the advice was talk to strangers. Like, literally
Only
talk to
after
strangers.
you're a certain age. Just let's get that.
Just talk to strangers. And I think a lot of the work in the beginning with Mana was outreach and trying to put yourself or trying to connect with these different communities that you're not a part of but feel a part of because they're Filipino. I think that was one thing for me. Yeah, just being open, and then also being like open to rejection and like folks just telling you no, like this is not, this is something that I'm not comfortable with doing right now.
My time here at JPC definitely gave me the foundation to be a storyteller in so many different mediums, right? So like talking with people, like we were talking about transcribing, listening to audio, writing exactly what they say, and then coming back and finding the story and finding those sound bites that we want to put into the labels. And also working with the museum, right? Because they have different styles and they, want to short it down. And yeah, I just feel like every aspect of storytelling comes out in this team.
Yeah, and we also had the challenge of telling these stories with certain limitations and requirements from the museum. And so how do we tell such varied nuance and stories of people's lives in 200 words? Right? So being able to pick out the core of these people's stories, our elders' stories, and figuring out what parts of their stories exemplify exactly who they are so that we include that in that label. And when people go to the museum, they have an understanding or they get a little peek into their lives, and they get exactly who those folks are, without us having to give them our 900 word first drafts. I think that was the challenge for me, was how do we break this down into 200 words so people know exactly who these folks are.
It was hard.
It was definitely a challenge. Yeah, you're spending, hours with these people, learning their stories, and how do you put it into like a little tiny soundbite or into words without forgetting some things.
Especially when you have to take out one part of their life, and it just seems like such a crime. This is essential to inform this part of their life, and it's
like there were so many things I wanted to keep with Aurora Hovland, which we'll have the opportunity to do that later on. But I think just with the exhibit, that was the most challenging part.
So I want to ask what advice you have for people who are thinking about pursuing JPC, but I also want to ask, what advice do you have for people who are thinking about embarking on their own projects that are looking into either community history?
Ooh, I think for the first part of your question, the advice I have for folks who are pursuing journalism or communications, I think for me, what I learned is that almost always, if a risk or opportunity presents itself and I have a gut feeling that the reward is going to be great or that it's going to all work out, I almost always took that risk. And so, you're going through this program, you're meeting a lot of different people, and you're learning about your community, and you're tapping into like the JPC network. When an opportunity presents itself to do a storytelling project, or if there's a fellowship, or your professor tells you, true story, to pursue journalism over communications, maybe listen, and don't be too in your head about what is going to happen like way far in the future, but like think about that opportunity that presents itself right then and there, and see if you want to go with it. I definitely took a lot of risks. I worked here at Advancement, and the biggest risk I ever took was saying yes to a DM on Twitter that asked me if I wanted to work at KTVA, which used to be the CBS affiliate here. And I had a really cool job here. I really enjoyed it. I was working with the chancellor at the time, and I felt really like a huge part of the UAA community. And then this opportunity presented itself, and it was a way for me to tap into a skill set that I didn't think I would have the opportunity to tap into anymore, because I'd made my choice, and I'd made my choice to work at University Relations. And And so when that opportunity presented itself, it was definitely a risk because I was really comfortable here, really liked my job, and then it was going into a totally different environment, which was the news cycle, the Alaska news cycle. And so I took that opportunity, and that totally changed the course of my entire career. And now I've been able to take on or work on projects like this that are really close to the core of who I am, which is being able to give representation to folks who normally would not be part of the mainstream conversation. And so if I hadn't taken that risk, I wouldn't be. I don't even think that I would be here working on Mana or anything like Mana. And then as far as an advice for folks who want to take on projects that highlight their community, I think, remember and always be cognizant of our values. I mean, for me, when we were doing all of this outreach and trying to connect with folks, especially elders, I always thought about some of our Filipino values and some of the things present within our culture. There's this thing in Filipino culture called hiya. And that's basically just like a certain level of shame that you have. And it kind of prevents folks from saying too much. And so that is always in the back of my mind. Like when we're talking to people about their stories, there's going to be a level of hiya, and folks are going to be really careful about the words that they choose, especially when they're talking about their lives before immigrating, their families. And so that, like having that knowledge of our values, I think has really helped, especially when we're talking with elders. And it also, like, this work doesn't happen in a day, right? Like when you're talking to folks, you don't just schedule an interview and then think you're going to get everything that you need from that person then and there, especially when you're speaking with an elder who's lived such a long life, right? Like such a long storied life with all of these different experiences. It's really about relationship building and kind of always having that feedback loop and showing up, even when they don't expect you sometimes, but just letting them know that, hey, I'm not just here, I'm not just around to get your story or to get something from you. You want to make sure that you really do build that relationship. And I think that's something that we've done with all the different elders that we've spoken to. And Josh does a really good job. Tasha does a really good job. I try to do a really good job to keep in touch with the folks that we've talked to. Becky Carrillo, who is the honorary consulate for Alaska, for the Philippine consulate, she has been a part of like my work with the Filipino community from the beginning. And so, keeping in touch with her and letting her know when her stories are up, or opportunities for her to see the exhibit, stuff like that, like little things that you don't think about when you're putting a story out there for the news or for like a feature. Yeah, just keeping in touch and keeping that feedback loop going.
Yeah, for me, I have similar advice to both questions. Mm-hmm. So for those who are pursuing JPC or are currently in there, you said taking risks. Mm-hmm. And for me, it's to just go for it, right? Like ask questions. And I always knew at a young age that I wanted to be a storyteller and a communicator, whether it was a journalist or what I'm doing now. And so I already knew that I wanted to do JPC. And it wasn't until my sophomore year where I spoke to a faculty member where he was like, what do you want to be? And I'm like, I want to be an anchor woman. And he was like, well, have you seen the TV studio? I was like, wait, what? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have a TV studio at UAA? He showed me that. I talked to KRUA, and at the time, Audrey Plez was the station manager, and we're best friends to this day. And that day, I volunteered to record a couple of sound bites for the radio, and then eventually I worked there as the sports and news reporter. I had my own radio show. It's very corny, but it was teamwork to make the dream work. So I would interview, student athletes and all that stuff, and it was super fun. And then one day I got asked to fill in for the coaches show. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. So for UA hockey, they had a contract with GCI to broadcast or to talk about the upcoming home games for hockey. And so the person who was hosting it, she was sick. So then I was like, okay, well, tomorrow at 8 a.m., I'm going to host this. And it was super fun. And just through that, like, I don't think people realize how big the network is here at JPC, because I've met so many amazing people and just so many connections that I don't really have to seek things if I'm interested in them. They just kind of appear. And it always comes back to UAA, right? So like I was asked to help co-found the UAA College of Arts and Sciences alumni chapter. And then now I'm part of the Alumni Association board. So just once you volunteer at UAA, they will always ask you. But I'm always glad to say yes because of the network and because of the community. It's just so rewarding, and it just means a lot. And the other question was, what advice for people who want to,
embark on a similar project about, their history and their community?
Yeah. And I think it's funny that you talked about that shame, right, in Filipino culture, because I definitely experienced that, not myself, but I saw that with my family. They came to America. My mom was 18 or 17, and they worked at McDonald's, and that's how they learned English. And I've always asked them, like, why don't you teach me Tagalog or Bisayat? And they're like, because we were scared people would make fun of us and that my kids would speak that. And I'm like, oh man, I wish that you would have, because like that's just like something so powerful that you can learn from your family. And even my name, right? My name is Pearl-Grace. I have 2 first names. And people always ask me, why do you have that? My mom, she grew up in Cebu, and she says that, Filipino culture where she was, you have 2 first names. Usually it's like Maria something. So my mom's name is Maria Corolla. But here she goes by Sandra. Again, that shame. And she didn't want me to have like a Filipino name. So her and my dad picked Pearl-Grace. And I've always like, oh, that's cool that you incorporate it. But, it would be so... I don't know, it'd just be interesting to actually have that history and the traditional names. So yeah, if you want to embark on something like a community project, I say go for it, because I'm learning so much about my family and other Filipino cultures that like I wish I did when I was younger. I grew up in Juneau, and that Filipino community was so tight-knit. Like every single Saturday you would have a potluck. I learned tiniklink. I learned the candle dance, right? I never burned my hair. And then when we came to Anchorage, we just never were a part of that Filipino community, and that's something that I wish I would have had, that I feel like I lost.
Shayne, I'm glad you brought up that word for shame, because it answers so many questions I have about growing up now. Like that contextualizes so much about what my parents did just growing up. So to have that word now is great.
Yeah, and I think projects like this, I mean, I didn't speak to my parents about this project, but they know that I'm doing it, and they have really like started to, in their own way. I mean, I don't think my parents are gonna tell me their story like word for word now, but I think they're starting to open up. They're getting older, and they're seeing, maybe there are some, I don't want to speak for them, but I'm seeing that maybe we should have talked a little bit more about life in the Philippines beforehand. I mean, granted that I did live there. I was born there, and I lived there for the first 6 years of my life, so I kind of have that like a really deep connection with my mom, especially because we immigrated together. But I would have loved to have known, like, okay, like, how did you all meet? Like, how did Dad come back from Alaska and meet you in the Philippines? And I think I think just understanding Hiya and understanding that contributes to maybe some of the barriers we have growing up with our parents, the communication barriers, not just like with the language, but just like emotionally and mentally. I feel like this project is really healing my inner child in a sense, because I'm hearing things from elders that I wish I would have heard growing up from my elders that were in my immediate family. And so it makes me feel like those experiences that I had as a kid are validated just by hearing like the words of affirmation come from folks who aren't even my family. It makes me feel like, oh man, yeah, like that experience that I had, that feeling that I had as a child, that sort of identity crisis as I had as a Filipino American teenager in Alaska, like that was valid because these folks went through it too. So yeah,
You're making me teary.
What do you want the community to get out of Mana? But also, what do you want the elders that you interviewed to get out of Mana?
oh man,
I'm wiping my tears. Ooh, give me a second.
Hold on. I didn't wear waterproof mascara.
I know, right?
Don't worry.
Oh man,
I can start.
It's an audio medium.
Nobody's gonna see us cry.
nobody's gonna see us.
Oh man, they'll hear us though.
For me, I want the community to hear our stories, right? We talked about like how on earth are we gonna like put someone's entire life story into 200 words? And I want them to get curious. I think that's a good way to expose them to our history and to the amazing lives of the Filipinos that we've talked to here in Alaska, all over Alaska, and get curious and ask questions and engage. And I think it is so phenomenal that we're having this in the first Filipino American History Month in Alaska. And I think that it'll start that conversation. And I'm like so proud to be like a part of it. Like it is so cool. And I want the elders to know that we're listening and we care about their story, and to just like see a different perspective that like, don't be ashamed of like what you lived and where you come from, and what you experience, because people want to hear that. And it's going to help people, just like you said, like it's healing your inner child, like it's sharing those stories. And we want to be connected. We want to have that deep connection by hearing you be vulnerable. And I hope that it can create a deeper connection within the community, not only with the people that they know, but with new people and the younger people as well.
I would echo what Pearl-Grace said in the first part, where I want this to help folks have conversations, if not for a museum exhibit, just for your family, to kind of open the doors to having conversations with your parents and getting to know, who they were before they were your parents, and getting an understanding of not just like their sacrifices, because I think we all know like our parents sacrifice a lot, but like the core of who they were, right? Like, did they love music? Like, what kind of music did they like when they were growing up? What were they into? Those are the conversations I think we don't have enough of. I think when you're growing up, your parents are just your parents, right? And you don't really identify them with anything else other than that. And so I hope the younger generation sees these stories and they, like Pearl-Grace said, get curious and start asking questions. And maybe we'll have a lot of like different submissions the next time that we do this, and we get to know other folks. As far as the elders, again, a lot of them, like we mentioned, they're like, why do you want to talk to me? Like, I'm not anybody. I really hope that even if they're not part of the exhibit, that they see these stories from all the different elders across the state and realize that everything that they went through, all of the sacrifices, all of the different experiences that they might think were, a little mundane or just part of like the course of life, like those little decisions that they made that led them to Alaska are, they have paved the way for like a new generation. And they have more impact than they think they do. Whether it's like working at McDonald's or, my dad, he has been a union worker since he was a teenager when he came over. Those little things that you think like, the work that I'm doing, my dad used to always say like, I work with my hands, like that's all I know. Working with your hands is like, it's tough because it's like, they think that just because we do these menial jobs, or just because, sorry, I'm gonna cry. Just because, you know, we go about like our lives just with the thought of, you know, we're just going to provide. That's all we are here for. And that story isn't worth, you know, being part of a museum exhibit or being part of anything bigger than, you know, our little bubble. Those little actions that they have or they make in everyday life really do have an impact. I mean, if it wasn't for my dad working with his hands, or my mom leaving behind her entire life in the Philippines to move her children over here, like, I wouldn't have had this career. I wouldn't have gone to UAA. I wouldn't have done all of these different things and have had these different opportunities because of the little decisions that they made. And so I want elders to remember that even though they think that their lives aren't anything special for their grandchildren and their children, their great-grandchildren, if they're old enough for great-grandchildren, they have really paved the way. And for the community, too, to understand that, like, their stories matter and that there are people who are listening and they want to know who they are. And we want to make those connections. Because if we weren't doing projects like this, if we weren't having these conversations, then those stories, like, they end, right? Or they stay within the families. Or if we don't open the doors for those conversations, and, you know, the elders are just, their stories die with them. And that's really something that we have been cognizant of this entire process. And so, yeah. And we've lost some elders too, like, in the last year, who have had such great stories to tell, but we weren't able to hear from them. So
you said something that I want to go back to. You know, you talked about all these elders sacrificing, you know, their life in the Philippines to come here for a better life, for their families. And I think that a lot of the elders that do that feel very lonely. And what I want these elders to see in this exhibit is that they're not alone, because other families have gone through not the exact same thing, but something similar, and they can connect with them in a way to make them feel like what they did was okay, and that, yeah, they're not alone.
Well, Shayne, Pearl-Grace, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having us.
Seawolf Voices is a production of the University of Alaska Anchorage Office of Advancement and Alumni Relations. Additional audio courtesy of Tasha Elizarde at KTOO.